Jade Reyes stepped off the hover shuttle, her boots making a sharp click against the obsidian floor of Galaxis Prime Interstellar Academy. The air smelled of sterile tech and ozone, like a storm frozen mid-strike. She didn't pause to gawk. She didn't need to. She'd read every detail about this place since she was 10, how the best and most dangerous minds in the galaxy trained here, how humans had fought tooth and nail to get even a handful of seats at the table. Now she was one of them. The only one in her year. 100 pairs of eyes followed her as she passed. She recognized the looks, half curiosity, half disgust. Tall, scaled beings in navy tunics whispered. A gelatinous form blinked multiple eyes. She ignored them all and walked toward the induction hall with measured calm. The red stripe on her collar marked her as Earth Combat Exchange, but no one here respected that. Not yet. She spotted him during orientation, Rusther Kyle. Six-limbed, towering, smug. The Ithran student commander, known for breaking ribs and rules with equal ease. He watched her with predatory interest, like a bored lion handed a toy. Jade didn't react. She'd been watched before. By worse. Lunch on the second day brought the first test. The Academy's dining dome gleamed with light refracted through layered crystal. Students floated food trays to anti-grav seats. Jade sat alone. She was halfway through a protein wrap when a shadow blocked her plate. "You're in my seat," the voice growled. She looked up. Rusther loomed, his 3 jaws twitching with amusement. His entourage, 3 multi-species hangers-on, snickered behind him. "There are 89 empty seats," Jade replied, without raising her voice. "Try one of those." "You think you belong here, Earth Girl?" he hissed. "This academy isn't for pets of the council." Jade stood. Slowly. Her eyes never left his. "Then why are you barking?" The table behind her fell silent. One of the feathered avian twins coughed, stifling laughter. Rusther's pupils narrowed to slits. "You'll regret that," he said. Jade nodded once. "Probably. But not today." She walked past him without flinching. Didn't look back. That night, her quarters were trashed. Furniture flipped, bedding shredded, and on her mirror, smeared in what smelled like cafeteria meat paste. Leave or bleed. Jade didn't report it. She cleaned, reset the bed, and stared at her reflection. She could almost hear her mother's voice again. "People will push you, Jade. Until you push back. But never give them what they want. Make them wish they'd never tried." She slept like stone. The following day, training rotations began. Jade aced reflex trials, adapted to alien gravity fields in record time, and outscored 90% of the class in logic sims. Still, whispers followed her like static. "Earth Girl. Combat freak. Lab pet." Rusther watched. Every session, every drill. Never stepped in. Not yet. On the 5th day, he made his move. During the combat tactics simulation, Jade was paired against a synthetic drone. The task, disable, not destroy. She analyzed the botched joint torque delay and dropped it with a spin kick to the knee, disarming the weapon from its clamp. Before she could stand, Rusther clapped slowly from the observation platform. "A trick." "Nothing more," he said, voice echoing. "The human dances. But in real combat? She dies." The instructor ignored him. But the students didn't. Murmurs began. Jade stepped down, face unreadable. Later, in the corridor, he approached her alone. "You hide behind silence, girl. That ends now." "I hide behind skill," Jade said, unblinking. "That's what scares you." He laughed. A deep, layered sound that made the walls seem to vibrate. "Then let's test it. Tomorrow. Midday. Training dome. No drones. Just you and me. No weapons. Just your bones." Jade didn't hesitate. "Accepted." word of the challenge spread by nightfall. Galaxis Prime may have been a place of science, but nothing drew attention like a fight. Especially when one combatant was the infamous Rusther Kyle. And the other, a small, quiet human girl. Some pitied her. Others placed bets. A few whispered she wouldn't even show. Jade arrived early. She stood in the training dome center, light casting long shadows across the mat. Her uniform was clean, her breath steady. A memory surfaced, her mother, bleeding, laughing, holding a rifle twice her size. "Don't fight for their approval," she'd said. "Fight because they think you can't." She would. Because Rusther had already made his mistake. He thought Jade Reyes was just another Earth girl. And tomorrow, he'd learn what Earth really made. The training dome buzzed like a hive at war. Students crammed onto the viewing tiers, Ithrans, Vortai, Hellions, even a few reserved Etherians, all drawn by the same rumor, a sanctioned one-on-one between Rusther Kyle and the human. No one missed events like this. Not when pride and blood were on the line. Jade Reyes entered first. No entourage. No expression. Just a single braid down her back and fists loose at her sides. Her boots made no sound. She walked to the center of the dome and stood there, still as steel. The mat beneath her feet shimmered, an energy-reactive surface that shifted color based on contact, pressure, and pain. Overhead, the dome lights dimmed to match atmosphere conditions across different homeworlds. A murky violet glow settled in Ithran light. A quiet message: he has the home advantage. She didn't flinch. Behind the partition wall, Dean Aruk Melm watched silently. His 4 eyes tracked heart rates, posture, and neural fluctuations on the display. Rusther's pulse was high, amped on adrenaline and ego. Jade's? A lake in winter. Flat. Cold. "You're really letting this happen?" Instructor Velm hissed beside him. She agreed. "It's her right under Combat Clause 7. She's a child. She's a human." Velm fell silent. The entrance hissed open. Rusther strode in, all 6 limbs flexed for display, his chest plate gleaming with clan insignia. The arena floor dimmed at his approach. His head tilted, grin widening. "I almost hoped you wouldn't come," he said. "You knew I would," Jade replied. He snorted. "You're alone. I don't need company to end this." A low wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Last chance to back down," he offered, more for the audience than her. "No. But I'll give you one," she said. "Walk away." His laugh echoed off the dome. Dean Melm keyed the start sequence. "Begin when ready." The moment froze. Rusther dropped into a low stance. He circled. Jade turned with him, calm, watching, not the muscles, but the eyes. Rage had already narrowed his vision. He wouldn't wait long. 3 seconds passed. Then he lunged. 2 arms aimed to grab, 2 to strike. It was a blur of chitin and muscle. Jade moved once. Her body slipped under his grasp like water through clawed fingers. She spun behind him, planted a heel to the back of his knee. His leg buckled. He roared, twisting, caught nothing. "You run well," he spat. "I'm not running." He charged again, faster this time, no feints, no strategy, just brute force. He slammed downward with a double arm strike, aiming to crack her shoulder. She caught it. One arm locked his, the other drove into his elbow joint. His scream tore through the arena as a crack echoed. 5 seconds. Rusther's followers leaned forward, disbelief scrawled across alien faces. No one moved like this. Not a human. Not anyone. Jade rolled backward as he reeled, using the momentum to vault to his side. She dropped low and struck, an open palm to his side. Not a flashy move. But surgical. He howled and staggered. She was dismantling him. Joint by joint. Mistake by mistake. He swung wild. She ducked. A sweeping tail came next, faster than before. It clipped her shoulder. Pain blossomed, sharp and electric. The crowd gasped. She stayed on her feet. Finally, he rasped, panting. A crack. Jade's eyes stayed locked on his. Want to see what happens when I stop holding back? He rushed her again, wounded, but stubborn. She let him come. Step forward. Sidestep. Elbow under chin. Twist. Pressure point. He dropped to a knee. Then her leg coiled and snapped upward, precise, final. His head jerked back. His balance vanished. 10 seconds. Ruster Kyle slammed into the mat with a force that cracked the floor beneath him. Blue ichor leaked from his nostril slits. He groaned, tried to rise, and failed. Silence. Utter, stunned silence. Jade stood over him. Her breath steady. Her stance relaxed. Not a scratch on her face. Dean Melm leaned into the mic. Combat concluded. Still no sound from the students. Just blinking. Processing. Ruster rolled onto his side, coughing, growling something incoherent. Pride shattered. Body bruised. Not broken, but close. Jade stepped back, bowed once to the instructor panel, then walked off the mat without a word. The crowd parted for her like a wave around a stone. In the observation deck, Instructor Veln exhaled. 10 seconds, he whispered. Dean Melm nodded. Not just a human. A reminder. Later, in the corridor, Jade passed a group of upper-year students. They didn't speak. Didn't sneer. One of them, a veteran 4-time arena champ, nodded once. Respect. Not applause. Not pity. Something deeper. Jade returned to her quarters. Her shoulder ached, but it was clean. Controlled. Inside, her mirror was spotless. No threats. No mess. Just her reflection, and something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She sat on her bunk, let the silence settle. The galaxy doesn't have to like us, her mother had once said. But it damn well will remember us. And now, they would. The aftermath lingered longer than the fight. By the next morning, Jade's name spread through every hallway, filtered through hushed voices and stunned expressions. Not cheers. Not awe. Something sharper. Recognition. As if they'd finally seen something they'd refused to believe before. She moved through the academy like always, quiet, focused, but now, the air shifted when she entered a room. Conversations broke. Eyes dropped. Even the bold ones, the ones who'd whispered fragile earthling, kept distance now. Ruster didn't appear at morning drills. His absence said more than his defeat ever could. No excuses. No challenges. He hadn't just lost a fight, he'd lost the image of invincibility. And nothing in Galaxis Prime bled faster than reputation. Jade reported to her tactical analysis class at noon sharp. Instructor Ven, a half-metal Myrosian, paused mid-lecture when she walked in. Miss Reyes, he said, voice static-laced, front row. A few students shifted uncomfortably as she passed. No one blocked her path. Ven resumed his lesson, but his attention kept flicking toward her, watching how she moved, how she listened. Noticing what others had missed for weeks. After class, she returned to her quarters to find a small parcel at her door. Unmarked. Inside, a single patch, the Galaxis Prime Combat Recognition emblem. No note. No ceremony. It wasn't official, just a quiet gesture. Someone had noticed. Someone who mattered. She pinned it inside her locker. Not on her uniform. Not yet. Later that day, Dean Melm summoned her. His office pulsed with soft blue light, walls lined with holographic trophies and combat records. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Jade sat without a word. You understand what you've done? He asked. I followed Academy protocol, she replied. You shifted power dynamics. She met his gaze. Was I not supposed to? He studied her for a long moment. Then he tapped a screen, pulling up the fight recording. No audio. Just 10 seconds of calculated motion, ending in a crash. I've seen 1,000 duels, he said. None like that. You didn't just win. You predicted everything. Like you'd already run the fight in your mind. I had. A pause. He leaned forward. What do you want from this academy? To graduate. To qualify for advanced combat strategy. Then command. Ambitious, he murmured. No. Earned. The corner of his mouth twitched. Amusement, maybe approval. You'll have enemies, he warned. I already do. More now. The ones who fear change. The ones who think humans should stay on Earth. I'm not here for them. Dean Melm nodded slowly. Dismissed, Cadet Reyes. She stood and turned, but paused at the door. They thought I'd be afraid, she said. That's why they lost. Then she left. That evening, the training dome stood empty, silent under the fading glow of the orbiting twin stars. Jade stood alone in the center, eyes closed. Her body still ached, but it was clean pain. Earned. She ran the fight again in her head. Each movement. Each breath. Not for pride. Not for memory. For preparation. A shift in the air broke her focus. She opened her eyes. Ruster stood at the edge of the mat. He looked smaller now. Still massive, still dangerous, but diminished. Not broken, reconstructed. Bandages wrapped his arms. One eye slightly swollen. But he was walking. That meant something. They stared at each other for several seconds. No one moved. Then he stepped forward, slowly, with the weight of a creature who'd never had to lower his head before. I came to kill your spirit, he said. His voice lacked venom now. Just fact. You failed, she replied. I know. More silence. Why didn't you finish it, he asked. Jade shrugged. Didn't need to. You could have crippled me. You knew how. Yes. He exhaled. A shudder more than a sigh. That's why they're afraid of you now. I don't care if they are. You should. She studied him. No smugness left. No threat. Just a young warrior who'd touched the edge of truth. I didn't fight you for respect, she said. I fought you because you gave me no choice. I thought humans were soft. Everyone does. Until they learn the hard way. He looked down. Then, in a gesture she never expected, he touched his chest with a closed fist and bowed his head slightly. A warrior's sign of acknowledgement. She didn't return it. But she didn't reject it either. He turned and walked away. When the door hissed shut behind him, Jade sat cross-legged on the mat. The stars spun slowly above her through the dome's transparent ceiling. Earth was out there, far from here, but she didn't feel alone. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny metal tag, her mother's old dog tag, worn smooth from years of being held. They'll always underestimate you, her mother once said. Let them. That's the first step to winning. Jade clenched the tag, stood, and walked toward the locker bay. There was work to do. It wasn't the fight that changed Galaxis Prime. It was what happened after. A week passed. Then two. By the third week, the shift had become undeniable. Jade Reyes found herself walking halls that no longer buzzed with mockery behind her back. No jeers. No sidelong glances. The academy, for all its cold grandeur and technological wonder, had recalibrated. She wasn't invisible anymore, but neither was she a symbol. She was something harder to define. Untouchable? Maybe. Respected? Not quite. Remembered? Absolutely. The Academy's central plaza buzzed with interstellar chatter, trade, and tactical simulation kiosks. It was midday, sunrise for some species, midnight for others. Jade sat alone at the base of the kinetic sculpture that represented unity through challenge. A fitting irony. A soft rustle interrupted her peace. "Mind if I sit?" She turned. An Etherian student, tall, translucent skin glowing with biolight, gestured politely to the spot beside her. His name was Phelan. Top of his class in xenodiplomacy. Always polite. Always silent. Until now. Jade nodded once. He settled beside her, long fingers folded neatly. "You broke the cycle," he said. She glanced over. Was there one? Every year, a human comes. Most leave. One left in a stretcher. Another transferred off-world. You're the first to stay. The first to win. Jade tilted her head. It wasn't about winning. I know. That's why it mattered. He stood again, offered a slight bow, and walked off, his glow fading into the crowd. Jade stayed still, watching his light trail vanish behind a row of floating kiosks. Later that afternoon, she received an unexpected summons. The counselor wing. Students rarely entered. Reserved for interstellar dignitaries, military envoys, and high-tier researchers. The guards at the entrance, two heavily armored Zarn, they didn't ask for ID. They simply nodded and let her through. Inside, a hologram pulsed, 8 beings in translucent blue forms, each seated in a floating disk. The Central Committee. Eyes of the Academy. Watchers of war and peace alike. Jade stood tall, shoulders back. "Cadet Reyes," one voice said. It was the Sorenth representative, its face half veiled by light strands. "You are here because what you did was not expected." Jade didn't respond. It didn't feel like a question. Another leaned forward. A trochary, tentacles curling as it spoke. "We do not condone personal conflict, but in this case, you followed the rules precisely. No weapons. No killing blow. Yet the impact echoes." A pause. Then, "You've reminded this institution of something it forgot." She raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "That humans are not here because of politics or treaties. You are here because you earned it." Another representative, an aged Martian ambassador with cybernetic eyes, nodded. "You represent not just your planet, but what it means to survive, adapt, and strike when underestimated." Jade swallowed hard. "Is this a reprimand?" "No," the Sorenth said gently. "It's a message. And an offer." A datapad slid from a slot in the floor. She picked it up. Advanced placement. Strategic warfare analysis. Cross-species command simulations. Combat leadership. Elite-level courses, restricted to third-cycle candidates. She was in her first. "You've proven more than potential," the Martian said. "You've proven readiness." She met their gaze. "So now I climb higher?" "No," the trochary answered. "Now you lead." That night, back in her quarters, Jade lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling, datapad resting on her chest. She hadn't opened it since the meeting. The glowing letters on its back pulsed faintly. She reached over to the locker, took out the Galaxis Prime patch, and finally affixed it to her uniform's inner sleeve. Not for others to see. For herself. There was a knock. She opened the door. Rusther stood there. Alone again. This time without tension in his shoulders. "Word is," he said, "you're moving up." She nodded. "Good." Silence lingered. "Why are you here?" she asked. He hesitated, then held out something. Her necklace. The dog tag. It must have fallen during the fight. "I figured it was important." She took it from him, quietly. "I'm not here to be friends," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I also know what it takes to get where you are. And I know I'll never underestimate another human again." She looked him in the eye. "Make sure you tell your people that," she said. He gave a faint smile, almost a smirk, but without malice. "I already have." He turned and left. Jade returned to her bunk, the necklace wrapped tightly in her hand. She clipped it back on, letting the weight settle against her chest. Tomorrow would begin a new set of challenges. Harder classes. Tougher expectations. New enemies, too. Not all of them would fight with fists. But that didn't matter. She had 10 seconds of history behind her. And a galaxy ahead.